Clint, how are you tonight?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Clint, yeah, I'm great. You're a very famous person in election lore history. At least you've testified in front of Congress about elections. And I think it was 2004. I think you can still see it on the internet where you go into how you flip elections with voting machines and how you wrote 24 lines of code and how easy that was for George Bush versus, I think, John Kerry in 2004. Is that right?
I don't remember. I think it was Carrie, yes.
Yeah.
It's been a day or two.
Yeah. So it's funny. It's in a day or two, 24 lines. And so what always struck me about that, no pun intended, with Peter Strzok seeming to do election operations on us in 2016 and now, but what always amazed me is nothing happened. You did
Nothing at all.
you did this great testimony and then nothing happened.
We still use those machines today. Different vendors, different things, but the problems are still the same. You can't track them. And the biggest problem is only the loser cares. The guy who wins thinks they work fine because he won. So when only the loser cares and the winners never care, it's never going to get fixed.
Now, there's a lot of different machines, and people are confused, I think, a little bit by the hardware and the software piece. Um, so, just to outline all this, the hardware piece, there's a couple of big players. One would be ESS, I think, was a player and still is. Dominion obviously is in the news as a competitor. Smartmatic is in the news, and then Sequoia, I think, in your day was a player. And Diebold was a player. Uh, so could you just kind of separate that out and explain the hardware versus the software?
Well, they aren't really hardware or software. Those are vendors.
Yeah.
So when you have a machine, you actually have a computer of some sort or another. It could be an open source system, could be a Microsoft system. Most of the ones they use, at least the last time I looked, which was several years ago, was basically all Microsoft-based systems. And then you put software on the hardware, and there's also a thing called firmware, which is what connects the software to the hardware. So the hardware does certain things when the software tells it to, and the thing in between is the firmware. You can have issues with the firmware, you can have issues with the software, because you can't really see at all ever what the firmware is because that's on the system. So if you change it, and it can be changed, if you change it, it can do anything you want it to do. Same thing with the software. If you have a software, the program only does what it wants to do. It doesn't care about a party. It doesn't have a conscience. It doesn't care about any of that. If you tell it that 2 and 2 equal 12, then 2 and 2 equal 12, it doesn't care. So it's just a matter of writing the code and putting it in there. One of the big issues with the companies is you never know what's on the computers. And it's all proprietary. So if you try and get the source code, they won't give it to you. Even if they give you the source code, unless you have access to the individual machines, you never know if the source code is actually the source code. Let me explain that. I was a computer programmer before I became a lawyer, and I did a lot of blueprinting. In other words, a big company would hire someone to write a program for them. Then they would do a handoff where they're going to bring the program in-house and make any changes and alterations with their in-house programmers. 90% of the time, the source code handed over to those companies was never the right source code. So when they tried to fix it, it would never work, and you'd have to keep hiring the other company again. The reason is because unless you compile that source code separately and you do a binary check to find out if it is the same, you can never know if the source code that you're given is actually a source code that's running on the machine. Does that make any sense?
Sure. I used to be a programmer as well.
Well, you understand it. I was trying to get to.
Yeah. No, I get it. We used to have a checksum where, for transmissions, and you would check, and you could tell if the transmission had been garbled. Same idea. If somebody's
Right.
tampered with the code, like you say, you only need to change one line. You can say 2 + 2 equals, or for instance, in this Dominion system, it looks like there was this idea of weighting votes. In certain situations, you might want to weight votes if, like, you had a homeowners association and some people owned the king size suite and then other people own the junior suite. You might want to do weighting for voting. So there are some situations where weighting makes sense. But in a presidential election, it doesn't seem weighting would ever make sense. Like somebody could vote 1 1/4 votes, and then Trump's vote would be worth 3/4 of a vote. Now that we don't know if that's true or not, but that's something that Sidney Powell has alleged that occurred. The other thing we have in this election, and I wanted to get your comment on it, was this connection to Belgrade, Serbia, where there seem to be 51 programmers that work for Dominion, which seems very odd after all the trouble we had in 2016 that, with foreign interference, that we would have so many programmers from an Eastern European country doing our program.
Well, in all honesty, it's stupid that we do it that way anyway. It's just stupid. What we ought to do, and I've been saying this for 20 years, if you look back to the very beginning, you can use machines to do the initial count if you want to, just so you have that initial, feel good. Paper ballot, hand marked, you run it through a scanner, and it tells you basically who won. But that's just a presumptive vote. Before you accept that vote, you hand count that paper ballot, and then you'll know who really won. And it doesn't help to actually cheat the machine. It just makes you look bad. Because if you give a presumptive vote that Fred won and Sally actually did, when you count the votes and find out Sally won, now your machine looks like garbage. So that's all we would ever have to do to fix it, and we keep jumping around and trying to make it more and more complicated and add security checks to something that can never be checked anyway, and it's really just a waste of time. We're just denying regardless of who you think won this election, half of the country will not believe it. And the issue is they can't check it. If you hand counted that ballot and you showed that ballot on video so everyone could, if they had the time, could sit there and hand count that baby by themselves and see how it went, everybody could believe the election. And that's really what we need to get back to where we need to be. It's kind of like Georgia, except in Georgia you really didn't get to see it, because even though you have observers, all you get to observe is process. You don't get to observe ballots. And that has certain problems because, even though you supposedly have a Democrat and a Republican sitting there making the call and comparing it, it would be better if the actual voters could do it themselves. And you could take out any ballots that had like weird marks on it or someone signed or something, to make sure that it wasn't, because it has to be a secret ballot. So the ballot has to be clean. If you have a weird mark on your ballot, you could put that in another stack, and then you could have a team from each side look it over and go, okay, this is the guy who won. Because they're going to be such a small number, it doesn't matter if the people actually see that. They'll know that there's a weird mark on it, or you could block the mark or something. But we have to have enough transparency that everyone believes in the government we have and in the system we have to count it. And right now, they have no reason to.
Just out of curiosity, did you see how the Brexit vote was conducted in England in 2016?
I did not.
It was a very interesting process. So if you could turn your speaker down, somebody has their speaker up, and that's causing a little bit of echo. But, there we go. Thank you. Or just mute the mic maybe until. What they did was they had everybody vote and put their ballot into a big garbage can that was clear plastic. And it filled up this wastebasket, clear plastic wastebasket that everybody could see the whole time. And when it got to about 1,000 votes, with the papers in it, they took it over to this other table and literally they hand carried it like it was a fireman, bucket brigade. And carried it over to the table the tabulation table, and literally in front of like 10 people, they opened up each paper ballot, they filmed it, and they were counting and tallying at each individual location, like precinct location. And then there was no question
No
about,
question.
unless it was a magic trick and somehow they did
But
this.
it's hard to do because there's people from both sides, and they're not going to let you have a magic trick.
Yeah, and it was sitting in the middle of a area, and so they counted it all up, and I really believe that's why Brexit. If CIA or MI6 or whoever intelligence agencies try to get involved in this, I really believe that's why Brexit got through, because it was just so transparent and so simple. Like you're saying, it was kind of exactly what you're saying, which is don't give me encryption keys and all this vote mixing with encryption and all this stuff that Dominion does or Seidel does. It just was straightforward, mark the ballot. And then you could audit it as well.
And the more you hide the ball, the less people believe you. So, I mean, what we have now with this last election and the elections 20 years back, because that's when I first told people about this, is you can't trust any of them. You really can't. You don't know who really won them. You just have to go by faith. What we need to do is to move forward. In fact, that's what I was hoping when Trump started contesting the election, that's where he would be pushing, but he didn't. Then he started saying, well, recount this county, don't recount that county. Recount this, don't recount. So he was doing the same thing that everyone always does. He was looking for advantage. He was going, I don't trust the Dominion machines in this county, but they're okay over here. You can't really do that. You can't do that. You have to have the broader sense. You have to have the good of the nation as the important feature. You have to go, let's just count everything. Count it all by hand and see if it matches. That's really how you have to do. When you start nitpicking and going, I want to count this precinct, but not that one, people look at it and go, you're just trying to win. You don't really care about elections. You don't really care about whether it's fair. You just want to win, which, quite frankly, most people, that's where they are. If they run, they want to win. So to put yourself above that is really a stretch for a lot of people.
Hey, can I jump in here real quick?
Sure.
So thank you, Clint, for coming on. It's nice to see you and meet you like this. We had this call the other day that you let me publish, and I appreciate it. And we basically came to the conclusion that Congress didn't ever do anything with your testimony. Jerry Nadler never did anything with your testimony. Maxine Waters never did anything with your testimony. And apparently Stephanie Tubbs Jones did try to do something with your testimony, and it didn't work out well. And so I guess my point is, well, the media also didn't put your testimony for at least 16 years now. And so that's why we're the news now. And that's why that's why I have you here, because you need to tell this to the American people again, apparently, because the network news has not touched it, and this is so important. We need lawyers, lots of lawyers, to figure out how we deal with this. How are we going to deal with this as a nation? And obviously our mismanaged for at least 20 years. So it seems to me, if we really want election security and integrity, we need to remedy this like now and then do. Yes, well, I know paper ballots don't cost millions and millions of dollars. There's not a lot of money in paper ballots. And so I don't know what do we do? You're the lawyer now, so I mean.
Well, hopefully enough people. Well, I would like to see the problem a lot with the whole thing that Trump is putting out there right now, and that's an issue. So it's too late to put it out in court. I don't know if you've read his filings, but they say things. But whenever you're asking for injunctive relief as an attorney, you not only have to say why it has to be an injunction, because an injunction is a pretty severe thing. You're actually changing the rules. So in order for injunction, you have to have a mass amount of evidence. You have to have everything laid out. You have to have all of it right there before the judge, because you're saying, Judge, I want you to rule on this without a hearing. No hearing, just give me injunctive relief, and I would be permanently damaged without it. But if you don't give that evidence, when you submit it, they're going to look at it and go, you're guessing, it's out the door. And people do this all the time. I've read both Michigan and Pennsylvania, and they're both basically the same thing. It says, well, this happened, but the evidence isn't there. So if they really want to win this case, they've got to put the evidence out there. They've got to put out all of these affidavits showing that there can be an issue. And Pennsylvania is really tough because it's 200,000 votes. Michigan's tough. It's 200,000 votes. Wisconsin, you might have a chance. 20,000 votes. Nevada, what's that, 10? Maybe less than 10? I remember I got how Nevada came down. You know, you can't have enough evidence to show that it is a problem, a real problem. If you have 2 or 3 things in a 200,000 vote election, you've got nothing. The judges aren't going to touch it. So they need to do that right now, or they will have lost any opportunity to present it. You can't present it afterwards. I heard that Pennsylvania just got kicked, and they appealed it. The problem with the appeal is you're only going to basically be saying, I did file it correctly, I can't give you anything new, but here it is. So they need to put that evidence out to the people so it can be seen. You can't just say it, you have to show it, especially for a judge. Or otherwise the judge is going to throw it out because he can't give you an injunction based on, I said it. You have to prove your entire case right then and there before that judge, overwhelming, so that he will go, okay, I'll give you an injunction, at least a temporary. And that's where they're running into problems.
And so with your testimony, is that not, I mean, can you say that they, I mean, do you know that they in fact used the software that you developed? Oh,
so I wrote it, I handed it off to them. I don't know what company it went to. I don't know who the connections were, and no one bothered to look. But even if they did, that was 20 years ago. What you need is a whistleblower that says this code is inside of whatever company, you know, has a question, and that it was rolled in. So that's the biggest problem is in computers. Well, you were in computers. Here's how it works. You have developers. You have people who basically set up the system analysts. You then have someone who rolls it in, but most times the people that actually roll in the code have no idea what they're doing. They're just rolling in code. They didn't write it. They didn't compile it. They're just rolling it in and making sure it works as a system. And then you have your rollout people that actually take the code that's supposed to be there and roll it out to the machines that it's going on. So to actually be able to find someone who could see all of those steps would be almost impossible. Almost impossible.
It's just intentionally making it impossible to ratify, to, and so, okay, now what?
Now what? What I would propose is what I proposed 20 years ago is basically we make sure it doesn't happen again. Do I think you can win this? I do not think so. Unless you have enough evidence, I'm talking like 25,000 affidavits for race that's 200,000, you're behind 200,000 votes. That's 10%. That shows a systematic fraud. If you've got 2 or 3 and they're guessy, like I think I saw this happen, you have no prayer to win because it's 2 or 3. There's one thing they complained about in the Pennsylvania one that said, what was it? Oh, a signature match. They were complaining about signature match curing. You know what curing is? Have you gone over that before? Anyway, if a ballot comes in most counties, the supervisor election, because they're an elected official, they want to get elected again, will call you on the phone or write you a letter or send you an email if you give it to them that says, you have a problem with your ballot, signature doesn't look right to us. Please give us a call, come in and sign it. Okay? In Pennsylvania, the Republican Party had filed suit that said they could not do that. They couldn't cure their ballots. It was then appealed. During appeal, it doesn't stand, right? It's just out there waiting. Okay? So the counties that normally did it continued to do it because they're elected officials and they want to get elected again. So they're trying to, make the voters happy. You messed up your ballot, you signed it wrong, please come in and tell me if it's you, show me an ID, something, right? So they're contesting it. But that accounts for only 1,600 ballots, which is nothing. If it accounted for 60,000 ballots, it would be useful. So it's all a numbers game. You have to prove not only that fraud existed, but it existed in a substantial enough amount that it would actually change the election. If you can't...
I have one possible exception to that, and I want to ask your opinion. Clint, if there's foreign interference, if you contracted and brought in foreign actors to alter the results. In 2016, we had some folks in the DNC who had very strong relationships with some foreign actors, and they used a piece of software called X-Agent. And X-Agent basically was a piece of malware that would log the keystrokes of the different administrators. It would harvest the credentials of the various passwords. Then they would use that as a command center of operations, sort of an electronic command center, to then launch other hacking attacks on different things. And there's a good chance that X-Agent was used again and was found in an audit of the Dominion software by a gentleman by the name of Russell Ramsland in Texas. He had done this audit. I don't know if you're familiar with them, and had said that this malware was in the code, and that's usually not a good thing when you have malware in the code.
Embedded in Dominion's code, or was it?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, embedded in Dominion's code, there was a piece of malware, and I think it was X-Agent.
How could he know that?
Well, I'm not sure if he did a reverse compile on the binaries or not.
Can't do that on C++. It won't work. So unless he had some old system like a Visual Basic 6 or something like that, unless that was the EXE, reverse engineering is impossible anymore because it actually sorts itself down. Everything's a stack. So if you write it in C++ or C# or Visual C, whatever you write it in now, it all takes it and pushes it back into a different program and then sends it through a filter. So you can't decompile like you used to. Used to be you could decompile almost anything and at least get passwords, if nothing else. But a lot of times you could actually get some sort of function out of it. But I don't know how he could go back and get that unless he had access to the software, and he'd also need access to the machine the software is on to make sure that software is on that machine. And then you're back to, does it match? Did you do a binary compare point for point and seeing what's on there? I mean, it'd be good if he had that kind of access. I think that would be an important point. I just don't know how he got that kind of access. Because I do a lot of election law. We've never been able to get a single thing out of them, out of any of the companies. It's all been deemed proprietary. When Diebold went out of business, they sold a bunch of their machines, or they put them on sale. People wanted to buy them to try and crack them to find out what's going on. And this is a company going out of business, right? So they have no need for these machines. They're not being sold. They wanted to find out what's on them. Diebold crushed them instead of selling them. Crushed them. Destroyed all that money they could have made selling them. Just crushed them and then shredded them. So there was nothing there you could actually look at. Seems like a little overkill, but that's, I would like to see how he got them. If you can send me information on how he got it, I'd like to see it, but I'd be impressed. Because I've never been able to get a thing out of him. Nothing.
Just to follow up on that, you're probably familiar with inter-process communication in a computer system and how a bus communicates with different components, and that you can basically black box a piece of software to see what signals are coming out of it. And you can use a very inexpensive bus listener to see what opcodes are coming out. And if you know the opcodes for a Biden vote or a Biden tally, and you know the ASCII representation or some other representation in for the Trump, you can then manipulate that. There's a point of interface there. And there was a hacker conference that was conducted in September of 2020, called DEF CON. It's the White Hat Hacker Conference. I think you probably are familiar with it. And they took one of these machines, the Dominion tabulation machines, and took it apart. One young girl took it apart with a ballpoint pen in 2 minutes. They showed that the bus was very exposed. Another person within a minute or two found a port, an access port. So it was kind of Swiss cheesy, and it was given a very bad rating, a 50-page F rating, or a very poor rating. Can a Secretary of State, we just had here in Georgia, just across the state line here in Georgia, the governor and the Secretary of State just certified the election based on $100 million invested in these new machines that was kind of jammed into the primary, and it was kind of jammed into the fall election, even though there was all these problems. But you're saying, you got to dance with that, dance with who brung you kind of thing. There's no real recourse there.
I don't know how you're going to get back from it is the problem. Because the issue is we're still using these machines, and we shouldn't be. We can use them to give a presumptive account, but we should never use them for anything else. In Pennsylvania's work, you have touchscreens. So you have a touchscreen in Pennsylvania, which means you don't even have a ballot to count. Once whatever happens on that touchscreen happens, and then they give it to me, the programmer, to do whatever I feel like with it, what touched the screen makes no difference whatsoever. If I already decided who's won that election, it's a done deal. And some people say, oh, there's logs. There are no logs. There are only logs if the programmer writes them. The computer itself doesn't write logs. It doesn't care about logging. Unless a software person puts a log in there, it doesn't happen. And if I do put a log in there, I'm the programmer. I'll change it. It doesn't make any difference. Nothing makes any difference. It's all magic once it goes inside. And the only way to keep that from happening is to get rid of those machines in the first place and hand count the ballots when you're done. And don't have some, because we have all these ridiculous rules. You must have this thing done in 2 days, or it doesn't count. Let it last as long as it lasts. If it lasts 2 weeks to hand count it, so what? So it takes a little longer, What difference does it really make? Let people count it so they're sure. They've got the video. They've got a presumptive vote, which I guarantee you for hand counting will start to be really accurate, because honestly, software is not that hard. Scanning technology is a little weird because you're basically looking at black dots and white dots, and then you're trying to guess if you have enough black dots in one area that it's a vote, as opposed to enough white dots in another area so it's not a vote. So that's what you're doing with scanning. So scanning, when it messes up numbers, it's in the scanner. It's not in the software. Because when you tell the software Fred won, it should take Fred's total and add 1. It shouldn't be that hard. It shouldn't be that hard. You shouldn't. So if we go that route, this is a good opportunity for the Republican Party to take the high road and say, let's get rid of these machines as our vote accuracy. Pitch them. You can still use them for presumptive because, everybody wants to know who won right after the polls close, right? And you're not going to do that with a hand count. Stem through there, but make sure you hand count them in the end. At least federal elections. Start with federal elections. Because I know when you get down to dog catcher, no one's going to want to count that. But even though they should, no one's going to want to see that count going down 500 levels. Start with your federal elections. Learn how it works. Do it on the precinct level, because on the precinct level, it's easy to do. You've recorded the tape. You have your two parties there. I've always said that a supervisor election should not be a party person. There should be a member of each party that shares that post so they can keep an eye on each other. Not because they're dishonest, but because people won't believe them. And that's suspect. You can have the most honest person in the world, but if your guy loses and the supervisor election is of the same party as the guy who won, they must have cheated, even if they didn't, right? So just, this is an opportunity to do that.
I have a question,
then,
Curtis. Based on, I was just going to say, based on your expertise and your experience in this very quite specific, field of election fraud, do you have any inkling of where things will go from here in our current situation, one way or another?
if it follows a trend that has happened for the last 20 years, it will go nowhere. The courts will throw everything out because there won't be enough to show substantial fraud, which is very hard to do, first of all. You need to find, where you got 200,000 votes that you're behind by, you need to show 20, 25,000 people that are willing to sign affidavits that they saw something that didn't work. Well, the problem with computer voting is you don't see anything. The cheat happens behind closed doors. So your supervisor of election could be the most honest guy in the world, standing there watching the machine count the votes, and he will have no idea when something happens. No one's that smart. The only one who knows what's going on is the programmer who wrote it and the person who rolled it out. And that's the only one who ever will.
One question, Mr. Curtis, regarding the VPN access and internet access of these voting machines. Supposedly, there's supposed to be an air gap if these voting machines are not supposed to be connected to a network where they can be hacked or malware can be inserted into them. And we're having reports that there was several VPN type connections, the type that shield the original to and from addresses, but there was internet connections to these machines from foreign countries. Now, we have traced it by the IP addresses to Belgrade, Serbia. There's other folks out there, Sidney Powell and so forth, that are tracing it to Venezuela. The Trump team seems to be distancing themselves right now from the Sidney Powell team. Have you ever run into that kind of situation before, where you had a violation, electronic intrusion of machines that are internet capable, but they're not supposed to be connected to the internet the night of the election?
For sure, all the time. In fact, I'm old, so I know this stuff. I don't know when you were a programmer, but you don't need a network card. You can actually have the machine network through your house wiring. And that will actually generate an IP, act as an antenna. And if you set it up right, you can actually network your entire house through the plug-in in the wall. So it doesn't have to have a wireless card. It doesn't have to have the normal things in order to network. There are a lot of behind-the-scenes things going on. And generally, if you're going to make a flip, the program I wrote, I don't know if anybody saw it, it was on the internet for a while, I don't know if it still is. The program I wrote flipped the entire thing by setting a single flag. So if you have a network connection and I want to flip a particular vote, all I would have to do is send a 1 byte flag. Do you know how big that is?
Not big.
It would be, I could send 1 billion of them when you blinked your eye. I could send a 1 byte flag and pick who I wanted to win in any election at any time. I mean, my numbers were hard-coded, so if I wanted to send the numbers, it would be different. Mine was 5149 because it was a prototype, right? So, but it was enough to bypass any sort of inspection, because back then you had audits if it was below a certain level. So I just picked above the level. Programmers can do anything. We write our own programs. So to get by the magic is almost impossible. You can never trust the computer. Never. I don't care who makes it. I don't care if it's a foreign intervention or a U.S. intervention. Would you rather be cheated by somebody from New York or somebody from Belgrade? who cares you got cheated, right?
Right.
The point is, the machine is no good, whether you have somebody coming in out of the country or whether you have somebody coming in from Seattle. The point is you don't want anybody coming in. And the only way you do that is your plastic garbage bag full of votes where people can actually count them, where you can actually see the process. You can see the votes, not just the process, because observers see the process. There were a lot of complaints that, they're not allowed to see the process. I've done a lot of election supervision, and down in Orlando, we did a recount, and they were complaining that they were over 6 feet away. Down in Orlando, you look into a room, you are 25 feet away behind a piece of glass, and you're just watching people, but you can't see anything. So what you're guaranteed is not to see the votes, which they don't let you see. You're guaranteed to see the process, which you really can't. It's some guy taking something out of an envelope, ironing it, and putting it in a file so it goes to the machine. But you can't possibly watch it. So it's more of a feel good. You would notice if someone came in with a Santa Claus bag full of votes and put them in there. But other than that, you're not going to see much else. So it's not really the best method to get things done. We have to actually change the process so people can believe in it and people can verify it themselves. And that's the only time they're going to believe. And that's the only time we're going to get a government. And even if the other side wins, we go, crap, he won. As opposed to, oh, he cheated. He didn't win. Not my president. And we've had that several cycles. And we will continue to do that until we get something we can trust.
Is it just going to be our finger ink pen thing or something? Or,
Going in you vote. The mail-in ballot works pretty well because you have a chance to compare a signature to one on file. Now, like I said, people should be able to cure that because, after 20 years when you register to vote, you might sign things a little differently. I don't because I write real scribbly anyway, so it always looks terrible. I don't know if it looks the same, but it looks terrible, and no one ever challenged it. But then they can cure your vote. You have to go in, show your license, sign again, a new card, and all that kind of thing. But we could go ahead. We don't have to change much of the collection process, just the way we count it.
In Ohio, they were doing this e-book signature. So it's like when you sign on the credit card thing, at the grocery store. And I thought, oh, that's a bad idea. So I did actually go in and they gave me samples of different, signatures from when it was handwritten versus the ebook. And, I could see, either way, as soon as you digitize anything, it's easy, it can be manipulated, copied, pasted, whatever. So, it's just a bad idea, I guess is my point.
Yeah, I'm not that fond of it either. Although they say that with some of the newer ebook type signing, that it actually does a better job because it can actually process and tell you if there's a suspect signature. So even though when I sign those things, it looks horrible on what I'm seeing. It doesn't look anything like my signature when I sign them. But supposedly they do points of signing and points of pressure, and it actually will validate as you're signing it that it's at least whether you need to check it by human eye or whether you don't. The whole process of comparing a signature just by human eye is kind of suspect anyway, because we're not handwriting experts. So, but with voting, most people aren't going to hire, somebody to forge their vote and to hand it in, especially on a scale where 100 million people vote. You'd have to pay a lot of money to actually make that of any value. So,
Mr. Curtis, can you tell us who Tom Feeney was just a little bit, pretty please, if that's okay, or is that?
Tom Feeney was the Speaker of the Florida House. He was the head lobbyist for the company I was working for, and he was Jeb Bush's running mate. He was the guy that wanted the initial program to do the voting, to be the vote flip. And I assumed he wanted to stop it, but the head of the company told me, no, that's actually for flipping votes. So, which I thought was insane anyway, because that means and he was a Republican. But that means that I was a Republican at the time too. But basically, that means that the Democratic Party has to agree to let the Republican Party put out this software made by companies that favor the Republican Party.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. What do you think, Floyd?
That can then flip software. And I'm thinking, no.
Hey, Mr. Curtis, can you
Right? Why are you using it anyway?
can you backtrack
Yep.
a minute or two?
What did I lose? Oh, I it didn't make any sense that they would allow the Republican Party to push this software idea out to companies that were basically said that they favored the Republican Party, and then you couldn't monitor it. So it didn't make any sense that they allowed it to go out there in the first place. But then again, it's kind of like the atom bomb. One party may have built it, that doesn't mean they get to keep it, right? The Nazis were the first to start the atom bomb. They didn't get to use it, right? So it does spread. And parties will cheat. I know this is shocking to you. I know you're about to have a stroke that, both parties will cheat. But, I talk to people in the Democratic Party afterwards and they say, crap, why didn't we think of that? Really? Not you're offended that your democracy is being thrown away? Crap, why didn't you think of that? So it's just the way.
So I'm going to keep throwing these scenarios. I'm going to throw another scenario at you if I can. I don't know if you can hear me, but another scenario is if we have a known hacker and we have identified a known hacker, a known foreign agent, and let's say this is Guccifer 2, we know he now is one of these hackers for Dominion voting systems. And we know his name is, let's just take this, let's just call him Lazar, Lazar, okay? And we find that he has an association with Peter Strzok, who was involved in saying Trump should lose 100 million to 1 and had this crossfire hurricane investigation to try to take Trump out of the election. Is there any way that that case can be made to a judge that this is a repeat of 2016 and therefore we need to pause before we certify and look into the criminal activity?
You're going to have to basically show that this hacker actually hacked the machines. Is he willing to testify to that?
Oh, I'm sure the hacker is not going to testify.
Okay. Okay, so we're missing that point. Do we have anyone in Dominion that's willing to say that this guy had access to their equipment?
That there supposedly is a Dominion whistleblower, but that Sidney Powell knows. He's from Venezuela. I don't like his story because he doesn't have code level expertise and he didn't work with the programmers. He's just talks about the modus operandi of how the election operation would throw or flip. It's sort of like if you were in the war room and you would stop the vote and then you would do the algorithm, you'd run this algorithm and then you would start the vote up again. And that's how they did it in Venezuela. Therefore, that's the only proof she has at this point of how it was done this time.
To win that in a court, you basically have to connect this hacker through either an affidavit or somebody who can show that he did affect at least a particular machine, that maybe the machines perpetuated down because the machines are all different, although they can be connected. Like I said, if you plug them in, they can be connected. But you got to show that they are. You can't show that they could be. Could be is why you lose these things. You've got to actually show the real connectivity. So if you can show that this hacker was connected to the Dominion machine somehow, had access to it, even that's not enough. You're going to have to show it access and he put this code on. So you have to somehow get that machine. You could then blueprint it against a machine that he didn't have access to and show the difference, assuming the code doesn't eat itself. Because the code could eat itself. As you, well, do you know anything about eating itself? The code? Let me tell you about that. If you want to hide code in a computer that's going to happen just once, let's say I want to change the results of this election. Who else ran? Anybody besides Trump and Biden?
Well, you did.
Who did?
You.
Not for president. But let's say I want to say I won, okay? I'll do write-ins. I can do it. It'd be a little weirder, but what the heck. I want to do a write-in for me, okay? So I would write a module that would then be called when a flag was set. So when it got a flag, it could be a flag of anything. Time of day, the number of votes that went into it, location status. Because the computer knows everything. So it will actually know when it flips the vote. That's why you can't test them. Because it knows when it's being used and when it's not. So we'll talk about Volkswagen later. Anyway, so basically I would set a flag. That flag would then call a program. The program would then flip the vote. All it is a database. I go and I flip the vote. If there's logs, I change the logs. Okay? 10 seconds, maybe 50 lines of code. Okay? Then I would call back to another module. That module would then replace the existing module with another module of basically the same size, and it would delete that one and then copy this on top of it. So now when you check the machine, it all looks okay, but the module that changed the election no longer exists. And it can't be recovered because I've now replaced it bit for bit with a module that doesn't replace the code. So it's gone and everything looks good, but it's not. That's how they eat each other. Okay? So if it eats itself, but let's say they weren't that slick. Because we don't test things and we don't check things. So maybe they didn't want to go that much trouble. I would have. I'm probably a good hacker, right? But so I could change that election in that particular set. If it's a cascade, if I can talk to the next computer, I can change it there. If I just set a flag and I put it on a tabulator, I can do this on a tabulator. So I don't have to worry about it. I only have to set it on one area and I can do it on a tabulator. I can also set the flag in person. So by going in and voting a particular pattern that's abnormal, it would read it, it would go, flag set, and then when it occurs, things happen. But once again, it's all speculative. This is what you can do. In order to win a case in court, you have to show this was all done. If it eats itself, you can't do that. Testing. Let's go into the testing of these machines. Did you know that these machines have parameters where no one is allowed to test in any fashion outside of how the manufacturer of the machines tell them to test? So you can't independently monkey test it. And why that's important is if you look back a few years, you'll find the Volkswagen case. Basically, Volkswagen put out a diesel car. Anybody remember this? Vaguely? Put out a diesel car. It was a great car. It got great mileage, but it still met all the EPA tests. Amazing. No one else knew how to do it. Every time they tested it, it ran fine. A group from, I think they're California, some college students decided to just test it on the road and see what happened. On the road, it was dumping 3 times as much emissions as was legally allowed. And what Volkswagen had done, and eventually a lot of people went to jail in Volkswagen because of this, is they had set their car up to run differently when it was being tested than when it was not. Because it knows when it's connected, and it knows what the system is, and it runs through it, and it's perfect. So on a test machine, you didn't have to have great performance. No one knows. So all you have to do is hit your EPA. Once you get on the road, it now pollutes like a monster, but it runs great. And that's the same thing that can occur in any machine that you don't test other than how people tell you to test it. So testing the machine does not help, which is why you run into another barricade of trying to check it. But if you guys can get hold of the machines, I can give you an army of people to look through them. Because no one's ever gotten hold of one before it's been wiped or basically sanitized to be tested. The ones that go out to the hacking group in California they have every year, those are sanitized machines. There's nothing on those machines that they can get into. They can still show you how to hack them, but once they're in, they don't see anything because there's nothing there to see.
Mr. Curtis, it sounds to me like you are describing a system that is the perfect system to steal and rig an election. Not only do you have various ways of swaying votes, as you said, using those various flags or parameters for the computer to do that, but you also have a way to cover your tracks digitally as well.
Absolutely. The only way to not do it is to not use it or not rely on it. You can use it, but you have to test the ballots outside of it. You have to separate the paper from the programmer. For a while there, they had these little toilet paper rolls they put on the side that are supposed to keep a tally of the vote and then show it to you through a window. I don't know if you ever saw those. It's like a little roller thing. Never saw those? Anyway, they didn't last that long because people figured it out. But basically, that's a shell game because once I know how I want the vote to be, because if I print that, it has to stay permanent. I can't go over and reprint that. That was the theory. Where I could rewrite the log, I can't rewrite the tape. But what I can do is re-roll the tape. So let's say you're a Trump voter. You go in and you vote for Trump and all the Republicans, okay? And you are a Democratic voter. You go for Biden and all the Democrats, okay? Next guy comes in, he's a Trump voter. He votes for the Trump, right? But I record it as a Biden, but I show him his because he's not going to know the difference. So I roll the Trump voter down. He thinks it's good. He says that's good. And I voted for Biden. And no one knows the difference because it's simply rolling paper. So the paper doesn't do any good. You've got to separate the paper away from all these crooked programmers because we can do anything. Absolutely anything.
Okay. I wanted to ask one other question, which is, again, this is hearsay evidence at this point. I don't have the server logs. I don't have the IP traffic, but there was a Cloudflare server DNS, fast DNS, VPN type connection to Belgrade, hearsay, that was operating all through the night and connecting all through the night to Belgrade, making these connections to all these different voting machines, which would be a highly irregular situation. If it was just one machine being connected in Wayne County, that might be incidental. But if it's in all the swing states and all the places where we had a large statistical upswing, the Biden votes, it looks like a hack. It walks like a hack. It talks like a hack. It seems like a hack. At what point would a judge say, at least we need to slow down here before we certify everything and take a look at this activity, especially if the National Security Agency focuses in on it and can then decrypt the packets and actually show the codes and commands that were being given from Belgrade?
Well, honestly, if it was connected that long, they need to go back to programming school. That should have been able to be taken care of in a split second. So if I wanted to change a vote in a computer, in a machine, or in a server, it would have been a blip. It would have been faster than you could read. I mean, it would still show up if you were logging separately everything coming in. But to have something connected, I mean, if they're not downloading a movie, you know, they're downloading an instruction that is so tiny, like 3 bytes top, right? So there, I mean, if you go on the internet and you have something in your email and it has 3K as the download, you know not to download that, right? Because it's not a picture, it's not Notepad, it's not anything. It is a small instruction that you really probably don't want on your system in the first place. So if it's really tiny, don't click the link. But that's all it takes. It takes 3 KB, maybe 10 if you're sloppy. It is so small that to have that, you know, that may be a rumor, I don't see why that would be true, because it doesn't make any sense. It makes sense from a people perspective, but from a computer perspective, that is way too long. That is someone who is just so sloppy that they shouldn't be touching a computer, because you don't need that. You need that, and you're done. And the election is flipped, and there's nothing you can do about it. So, but in order for that to work, let's say you actually have that. Let's say that's not a rumor. Let's say that that is real. You'll need to present that to the judge. The problem with these, if you can actually go on and download what they filed in court, and some of the things they filed in court were really bad, which is odd because this guy is actually a pretty good election attorney, I'm told. But some of the stuff is really bad. It's almost like they're trying to lose the election, lose the cases. It's so bad. Here, let me read something to you, and let me sense. This sounds like a lawyer. Allegheny and Pennsylvania counties conducted the canvassing and tabulation in convention center rooms and placed observers far away from the action. Does that make any sense? Far away from the action?
Right.
Is that a news reporter? That's not a lawyer. That's not what lawyers say. Lawyers don't say far away from the action. We would say what action we're trying to see, what wasn't allowed to be seen, how far away you were. That's a throwaway. Any judge looking at that would go, what? In fact, if I were a judge, I probably wouldn't read the rest. I'd probably go, okay, I got a law student here.
Well, I see you got a American flag behind you, Mr. Curtis, as well as looks like a JFK sketch. What do you think we can do as far as it pertains to this? I mean, you testified in past elections, or at least one past election. You said, I think it was Kerry. I'm not sure if you have anything you can testify to this election, but is it just a matter of getting the people who did see something that morning to come forward and trying to get them to have the courage just to rack up affidavits, or what's the game plan here? What do you think?
Out there. You need all the evidence you have, and you need it out there now. It may even be too late because you know all these cases where they didn't get to see the action have kind of blown it out of the water because they're going to keep getting turned down. Law, when you do a legal case, everything has to be precise. It's not action. It's what's wrong, why it's wrong, how long it took. That we should get paid by the word because we're wordy, because that's what you need. And you need all that evidence. You can't just say that. You now have an affidavit say, I am Fred Smith, and I went in to see this, but instead of standing at the 6-foot line, they made me stand across the street. And when I complained, they said, too bad. And you need thousands of those because you're trying to overturn 200,000. You need less than that in Nevada. You need less than that in Arizona, because I think those are fairly close, right? I called them up earlier. Let's see. And there's one other state, I think Michigan, not Michigan. Michigan's pretty far away. You also need that in Wisconsin. Wisconsin's small. I don't know if that gives you enough numbers to win, is the only problem. If it doesn't, then you have to shoot for the bigger states. The bigger states take more evidence. If you're going to try and overturn 200,000 votes, you need 20,000 things to show a systemic fraud is continuing to occur. Then you can put in these speculative things as to how this could affect that fraud. I wouldn't mind testifying and telling them, although, they can call it up on the internet anytime if they want. But, anything I have to say is once again what could have happened. And what you need to get to is what did happen. This hacker, did he have access to Dominion? Did it get on the system? Which system did it get onto? Where was that system rolled out? And then you can target and say, okay, let's see if this system can affect the votes. But in none of these actual things that were filed, were there any requests to sequester the machines? Not at all. There were nothing filed that says we want the source code from these machines and we want them locked up until we can test them. Nothing. So lacking that, right now, that how long has it been since the election was over? 2 weeks? Almost 3?
It's been 19 days, I believe. You're really blackpilling us right now, Mr. Curtis. I'm going to pass it off to George. He really wants to say something.
Well, I'm just going to keep asking questions, and we can all discover together. We've identified this program called SMOTE, and it's called Synthetic Minority Oversampling Tabulation, which is a program that apparently Dominion put in to trigger or flag areas where there may be minority voting being suppressed. Okay, so this is Republicans somehow maybe changing the polling locations, or somehow not accepting signatures, or making arbitrary determinations on when somebody fills in a box or whatever. So there is a program apparently that wakes up about periodically. We don't know if it's every half hour or every hour, but SMOTE uses a data set or big data of all the previous elections that have occurred over the last 100 years, that sort of thing. Looks at demographic trends, looks at race, looks at income. Mainly uses US Census data, but then it also uses other consumer type data to do individual profiles on each voter in order to protect their vote. Okay, but so there is some reason or logic why there would be a connection to Belgrade for SMOTE to run its analysis. I don't know why it had to go to Belgrade when it could be a local program, but we're hearing anecdotal stories of this chatter at these vote tabulation periodic times. Okay, let's say every hour, just for argument's sake. But
Okay. Who logged that though? I'd like to see that information. I mean, how did they get this log that it went back and forth? Who actually?
Well, Cloudflare is a public company.
Okay.
And they keep records and logs of resolution of DNS. And so if I typed in, if my machine, my SMOTE program called out to Cloudflare, let's just say smote.dominionvoting.com.
Okay.
Well, and I know that the computer doesn't know where smotedominion.com is. It has
Right.
It has to go to a DNS server, domain name lookup server, to then say, oh, that's actually IP address 82.117.198.54, which is the IP address of the server or whatever in Belgrade. So there is a third party, because they're the man in the middle transferring this information. There is Cloudflare logs that show this communication. Now, the only problem with a lot of this communication is it's not in clear text. The packets have been encrypted with some type of tunneling technology like HTTPS or some other type of tunneling, encryption. But at least could seize the logs of Cloudflare and then seize the packets, and then ask the individual voters, ask Dominion to decrypt, because they would have the keys, they would have the encryption keys, ask them to decrypt so that people could read in clear text what was going back and forth in the packets.
Okay. And this was going on in the voting machines themselves?
Not in the voting machines themselves. I'm told it's in the tabulation step. And I don't know where.
Well, that would be highly irregular, because why would you do that in a tabulation step? A tabulation should be counting the votes. If it's doing something else, I would say that's something we really need to look at. Because why would it care?
Well, here's why the original region for SMOTE, and it was supposedly written at the University of Minnesota through this Lazar Evic guy. But if you were turning people away, let's say, because you didn't open the poll or you didn't advertise the poll correctly and you gave a wrong address or something, and there would appear early on in the voting returns that there was an abnormality. Okay, that, and I'm talking about early voting, going all the way back to even early voting. Okay, that this was a program that was supposed to catch those abnormalities. I don't know enough about it at this point, but I'm just putting out the hypothetical to you to say,
Okay.
could we ask a judge to seize those Cloudflare server logs? There was also communication.
Definitely should.
Okay.
You definitely should. Yeah, should have asked him 19 days ago, bro. But you definitely should seize that and find out where that came from. It should never be in the tabulating. It should never be in the voting machine, because there should be no voter information in the voting machine. The only voter information is in the poll book. So when I go in to vote and they grant me access to the machine, that's where it ends. How I vote once I get in there is not connected to me in any way. It's all divided out. And then once that information is collected, then that goes to the tabulator. But it goes as raw numbers. It never goes as, I'm a black sharecropper from Georgia. It just doesn't. Or it shouldn't. If it is, I would say there's a major problem.
Well, I do think that the black sharecropper from Georgia is a capability of the system. So you have it's called a poll pad. It's an iPad. It's actually an iPad where people put their signature for the signature comparison against the poll records. And that requires a lookup, and an AI algorithm, signature verification algorithm then is started and says, oh, this is Curtis, this is Mr. Clint Curtis's signature. So there's a lookup, so they know there's a ping against Clint Curtis. Now, if that goes back and hits a database and says, by the way, Clint Curtis voted this way in the last 20 elections. And if you accumulate and tabulate that by expected probability of your vote, and the expected probabilities of the total vote is not going in that direction, you know that potentially there's tampering. You see what I mean?
But they could show turnout. But you could show turnout simply from the poll records. But it shouldn't ever been on the server. It shouldn't have been on a tabulation, because the poll books are separate from the vote. They know I voted this election, last election, the election before, and I skipped one. They know that. But they don't know how I voted in the end, because that's not how it's kept. It's actually it's supposed to be, it's computers, you never know. It's supposed to be a completely separate pipeline. So the database for the polling, to make sure that I am a registered voter and I'm allowed to vote and I'm in the right precinct and all that kind of thing, is separate from the voting machine. The voting machine is a completely separate thing. It may be made by the same company, and if it is, and if it has a connection, that would be a problem. But generally, all you're going to have to do is you have to guess whether I'm a voter or not. So you're basically how I'm going to vote. So you're going to have, I'm an old white guy. How am I going to vote? Well, if the information is correct that they gave, 57% of old white guys voted for Trump, right? I'm not that guy, but that would be the guess. Okay, so they could do it that way, and that could be your ping, and that is a lot less of an issue, whether it's in Belgrade or Canada or New Jersey, because then they're just basically doing a get out the vote push. We have too many old white guys voting. We need to get more suburban women voting, right? But at that point, it's a guess. If it's coming from the tabulator, it's a major problem, because that should not be connected, and that should not be collecting information on the person. The person's never tied to the vote in either the tabulator or in the voting machine. They don't know how I'm voting. Once I pass the polling book, they have now granted me access to vote. And then they give me a chunk of paper, and I go and I mark it, fill it out, and then I go stand in line, and then I shove it through. But there's no connection between the thing that I filled out and me. There's no numbers on them that identify me. There's nothing on there that they can then tie that piece of paper back to me being granted access. It's completely separate, or it's supposed to be.
Well, in Dominion, in actual fact, I agree with you. That would be the most secure, but it's not separate. When you fill out the poll pad signature, you get an actual encryption device that you then plug into the voting machine. So it's called a digital key, and you put the key into the voting machine. So there is a way of encoding a unique identifier on that digital key. I mean, that's what public key, private key infrastructure is all about, right? Everybody gets a different unique identifier. And if you did put it in there, I could harvest how somebody voted. I'm just saying I'm not saying it happened, but I'm just saying that it isn't just a paper ballot, because what you do is you put the digital key in the voting machine, and then you hit all your selections, and then you press print.
Touchscreen breaks all the rules. Touchscreens break all the rules. You should never use them.
Yeah.
It was just a dumb idea. There's no way to record it. They could record how you vote. They could do anything in those things, because you aren't separated from the machine ever. So could that happen then? Absolutely anything could happen. Take nothing off the table. So
it printed a unreadable QR code. So it took all my selections and printed them as an unreadable barcode. So I can't look at a barcode and tell if I voted for Biden or Trump by looking at the barcode, and then they just feed it into the tabulator. And that's
the barcode wouldn't have mattered anyway. What the barcode said wouldn't make any difference.
Right.
Right, because they can
Yeah, right.
they can just have it print out anything, right? It's just like you scan a QR code and it shows a picture of Barney or whatever.
Anything. They could print anything. They could give you a barcode that reads when you send it through one machine one way and reads it different when you send it through another. So it doesn't mean a thing, because that barcode is probably some sort of encryption key, and that's a waste of time. Never use a touchscreen, because you're just throwing it away. If you want to gamble, go to Vegas.
Well,
That's the moral of the story, then, right? That's the moral
What's
of
that?
the story. We need to make it so it's not so damn complicated. Use some paper ballots and call it a day. I mean, this whole rigmarole, we've gone through all these different scenarios. I guess one quick question I have: would you say it's a statistical anomaly that these swing states are at 49-51, just as you'd written the software? Would that, or no?
Who knows? That's the only thing. You don't know, and you'll never know. The problem is we have a divided nation that is, hovering into 51-49. So if you're going to write it, that's the way to write it. If you're going to flip it, that's the way to flip it. You don't want to do a 60-40 in Mississippi. It'll jump out at you. Does that mean you could win Mississippi with a 51-49? Probably, because it's almost impossible to check it. That's why I wrote the 51-49. That's what I explained. Because let's say you wanted to do the ground count. You wanted to do it by affidavit. So you found a precinct that was weird. Should have voted Trump, voted Biden. Voted Biden strong. Should have voted Trump. You could technically go door to door, find out if those votes really existed, because you would have, the poll book will show you who it says voted. So in a certain precinct, you'll have their name, their address, phone number, whatever. You could go door to door and you could ask them, and you get an affidavit and say, okay, this doesn't match. That would be evidence. Get an affidavit, make sure it's notarized, so they can notary with you. If you get enough affidavits, you got a chance. If it's 51-49, you got a real problem, because you need almost 100% of the people that voted the way you wanted them to respond to you, or you can't tell. If it's 60-40, then there's a big enough gap, because if 50% voted but you said only 40, now you have to get 41 of those 50 as opposed to 50 of them. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Always a numbers game. Depressing, huh?
It ain't good.
Yeah.
It ain't good. It ain't good. The filings ain't good. If you want to fix this, if you have any connection to the Trump organization, tell them to get the information out there to the public, not speculation, not this could have happened or this happened, but I'm not going to show you the affidavit. Bunches of affidavits, everything out there on the table. It's the only chance you have to turn it around.
Michigan.
Tell those lawyers to lock down those machines.
Yeah.
Because if they do lock down the machines and check them and they've already been wiped, you are screwed because your evidence is already gone.
In the Michigan case, we had about 36 affidavits, and we were waiting for the affidavits. We were even kind of stomping up and down. And then finally, the Grand Rapids Justice Law Center came out, and they did have a lot of affidavits. But I do agree they do fall into this. We were put behind a wall. We were put 12 feet away. We were intimidated. A whole bunch of votes showed up in a bag, and they 130,000 votes, and they were all Biden. These kind of anecdotal stories.
Right, but nothing real. You need the guy carrying the bag.
Yeah, we actually have Santa Claus in a red Ferrari. 345.
Really?
Literally. In Michigan, and that's why I put all the emphasis on that, because it is prima facie evidence. It's sort of like, here's the bank robbery. You hear the bell ringing. Here come the robbers out with the guns. Here's the loot in their thing, and there they are. It's just in reverse.
Right.
And that's why I put all the effort into that, because it's the only way I could see is to flip this thing.
Did you have video of it?
Well, we're trying to find the video. We have people, eyewitnesses that say that, but no video yet.
See, that drives me crazy. When you get eyewitnesses, everybody and their dog owns a phone. Take a freaking picture.
Right.
And even sometimes that doesn't work anymore. But it helps from a legal perspective. You go, okay, Fred did not break into the building. He is 5 foot tall, 110 pounds, and here's a picture of the guy who did, and he's 6'4" and he weighs 400 pounds. Fred did not break in. You win. You know what I mean? Otherwise, it's this, hey, it looked like him. He had on the same hat.
Right.
So.
Well,
So get the evidence out there. Evidence out there. Then you have a chance. Otherwise, you are toast. And with the filing, if you look it up online and you look at the Pennsylvania filing, right now they've done an appeal before the Supreme Court. It is a loser because it was a loser case when it was filed. There might be time to refile it. I don't know, but they need to refile it quickly, and they need to have the evidence, and they need to present it all at the same time, because that is your hearing in an injunction. It's not, I want to save this back for the hearing, because you're actually asking for someone to make a ruling basically favoring your case before the other side gets to say anything. So you need overwhelming evidence to make that happen. So tell us.
We are running out of time here, Mr. Curtis. Double entendre there. We're nearing up on the end of our show, but what you're saying is this has whatever the evidence has to come out ASAP, and certainly before January. Is there some silver lining in this? Maybe because I actually didn't vote, but I just want us to have free and fair elections. And for those people, silver lining maybe, because you're hitting us with some black pills, as I said before, which we appreciate your expertise.
Silver lining is you can use this so that next time it doesn't happen again. Because even if you get it out now, you've already let the machine sit there, and 19 days, you'll be lucky if they have on there anything close to what they had on there before. Or they even know which machine to give you. It's all going to be muddled and hidden, and because they have no interest probably in actually telling on themselves. If they're guilty. If they're not guilty, it's still going to look like they are, right? Doesn't matter. but you have a chance to turn this into, we don't want these machines to rule our elections anymore.
Yeah.
Paper ballots, you can scan them if you feel like it just to tell me who won, but it doesn't count until you actually count the paper, and give people time to do that. Don't rush these, deadlines so quick. I mean, they don't actually have to have it until January. So if the counting goes on and it looks like it's going to be close, just have both sides transition and get ready, and the winner goes, and the loser had a chance to transition. What the heck? Would it hurt? They're ready for nothing, but at least they're ready.
Ari, did you want to ask a final question?
Well, I honestly, I just thank you for your time for doing this. It's very important to get it out there again 16 years later. And, we appreciate you and your bravery. That's all I can say. I really, and if we can get the media to jump on board and maybe give you an interview, and maybe some people who are watching can get this to the right people, whoever that might be. I don't, be it Sidney Powell or,
Right people.
Yeah, the right people, whoever it is, the code monkey guy, or the 8chan guy, or somebody who can do something with it. But again, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. And
you're quite welcome.
And thank you to Ari.
Me.
Thank you to Ari for setting it up as well. And I'll just pass it off to George.
Thanks, George.
I want to say Ari for making this happen, and the original phone call you can listen to as well. And there's the original testimony that Clint Curtis made in 2004. You can look on YouTube. And Mr. Curtis, I want to say thank you to you too. We'd love to have you back if we're going to file amicus briefs. Amicus briefs are not the original argument, and so
you also can't lock down the machines.
Right. I can't. There's no injunction power or anything like that. But if we do have the smoking gun, and we are looking at some various third-party sources for this connection to Belgrade, and then we're also trying to find this videotape that you said was so important of the red Ferrari at 3:45 a.m. Not a lot of people driving at that time of night with a red Ferrari. We should be able to find that. But those are the two things we're working on. So we'd love to have you back if we find a smoking gun.
Okay, sounds good. There's not a lot of people driving a red Ferrari. Find out the routes headed into where he would be, and ask the banks and other places that have surveillance cameras. They should have a picture of a red Ferrari driving around. If you can't get the first one, you might get it in a roundabout way.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The last thing I'll say is, if you tweet this out, I think the Trump team's going away from Sidney Powell because of maybe some oversteps in their case. But I do think the Sekulows, Jay Sekulow is really has argued cases in front of the Supreme Court, and that seems to be where this is going. And his son Jordan Sekulow is handling all the social media, so you can tweet out to Jordan Sekulow. But this kind of expertise is fantastic, and I just want to say thank you again.
Yeah.
Give me a call if I can help.
Thank you.
We'll do that, Mr. Curtis. Thank you so much. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. And before we sign off, Mr. Curtis, did you have any plugs? I'll put your website in the description box, but anything else?
I have a law office if you want to do election law, but you got to bring me evidence. Don't bring me guesses.
Yes, sir.
You'll just waste $20,000 and it'll go down the tubes.
Yes, sir. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in for our chat tonight with Clinton Curtis. Once again, all links will be in the description box. Big thanks to Ari for sending up. And, of course, T-Dub in the house, George Webb. This is Addy Ads for Neighborhood News Studio. And we are signing off. Stay frosty, and God bless America, folks. Until next time.
Bye-bye.